Hi, welcome to the Weaver Sews. I'm Daryl Lancaster. Transferring notations from pattern to the cloth can be challenging with handwoven fabric. Transfer paper and tracing wheel are pretty useless when trying to mark fabric like this. Thread markings, or tailor's tacks, make the most sense. They stay put mostly until you don't need them anymore and are usually visible on both sides depending on how you create them. First, though I covered this in a previous video, I can't stress enough how important it is to cut handwoven fabric singly. This fabric isn't actually handwoven, but a chenille type of tweed that closely resembles something from my loom. It can be skewed easily, and there is no way to get the grain on the underneath layer thread perfect. This means that once you cut out one pattern piece and transfer the appropriate markings to the fabric, you'll need to flip the pattern to cut another half. All pattern pieces must be flipped when cutting the fabric singly. Remember, the two halves of our bodies are mirror images of each other. You'll need a pair of mirrored fronts, backs, sleeves, collars, etc. Cutting singly and flipping the pattern becomes a little challenging when the pattern piece is cut on the fold. I'm going to show how to cut one half the back, transfer the markings, and then flip to cut the other half. I've discussed laying out the pattern in a different video. I keep the fabric right side up so any imperfections are apparent. Make sure the pattern piece is placed on grain in both the warp and the weft direction. If you used a tracing medium with a grid, take advantage of the grid to help with layout and getting the grain right. I have a trick for preventing the horror of accidentally cutting through the center back. Place two long quilter's pins perpendicular at either end of the center back line. This prevents turning with the scissors and making the gravest of errors. Though this is a 2-yard rotary cutting board underneath my fabric, I prefer the feel of shears in my hands. I'm partial to Kai's scissors. Once half of the back is cut out, it's important to mark the fabric before flipping the pattern piece. This is probably my favorite tool in the sewing room. It's a needle threader from Clover Tools, available pretty much everywhere sewing tools are sold. I keep one in a little basket with the tools specifically for thread markings. I use embroidery floss for making my thread markings. The matte finish and drag from the twist stay in better than regular sewing thread. I have two colors that seem to work for most applications. I have a skein of lime green and a skein of bright red. Cut a length of floss. Each strand of floss has 6 ends twisted together. Remove one of the 6 ends, leaving the other 5 behind. Place a basic sewing needle upside down in the small hole on top of the needle threader. The unit works for most basic needles, except for large embroidery needles that won't fit into the hole, and very small quilting needles. I keep a couple of needles that I know work with the basket. Lay the end of the floss across the well behind the hole, and push the button on the front down and release quickly. There's a bit of a learning curve here to get the right touch. Carefully remove the needle, and you'll see a 1/4 inch loop of thread stuck through the needle. Carefully pull the loop until the ends of the floss are even. Do not knot the floss when making thread markings. I want to take a minute to mention that notches, the traditional notation on a commercial pattern, are usually found at the cutting line on sleeves and armholes. Because of the ravelly nature of handwoven fabrics, all of my patterns have the notches moved to the seam line, replaced with dots. I do this with commercial patterns as well. Because the fabric was cut in a single layer, tailor's tacks or thread marks are a breeze. Insert the needle alongside one of the marks, digging deep so the thread reaches the underside of the single layer of fabric. This will allow it to be seen on the wrong side, helpful when sewing darts. Come up the other side of the mark, pull the doubled thread through so that only the pair of 5/8 inch or 1.5 centimeter tails are left. And then trim. This is important and where most of my students err. The thought is that to keep the tack from falling out, it's better to keep the tails of the tack as long as possible. This practice actually makes the problem worse. Long tails get caught and can get sewn in so securely that removing them becomes difficult. The tails should be no more than 5/8 of an inch or 1.5 centimeters long. This is a case where less is more. If you're concerned about the tacks falling out, go in and out again on opposite sides of the mark, creating a second set of tails. When a double mark, dot or notch is indicated, create 2 thread marks or tailor's tacks side by side. This will be important when trying to determine the front of the sleeve, which gets a single dot, and the back of the sleeve, which gets 2. Once all the marks are transferred to the fabric, carefully remove the pattern.
I'll zoom this part up.
Slip your finger under the pattern and support the thread marks so they don't catch on the pattern and pull out. Flip a pattern placed on the center fold over and line up the center fold line on the same warp as before. I've actually put pins where that warp is, so I remember. Make sure the pattern is on grain, both in the warp and weft direction. Pin carefully. Pins are placed parallel to the cutting line. I like to use large, obnoxious ball-headed quilter's pins. They don't get lost in the fabric. Again, place 2 large pins perpendicular at either end of the center back line. Even though half the pattern is cut, accidents can still happen. The whole process is repeated, cutting the remaining half back and then transferring all the notches, the dots, and markings to the fabric using thread tacks. Lastly, there is a terrific advantage to these tacks when actually constructing the garment. Often hand-woven fabric looks the same on both faces. So telling left from right, wrong side from right side can be a spatial challenge for anyone. Since the fabric was cut and marked right side up, when the instructions say to place right sides together, I create a visual in my head that the tails of the tacks kiss each other in greeting. This really helps to make sure that you have the correct face and the correct direction every time. I'm Daryl Lancaster for The Weaver Sews.